Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, Red Circle, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Also, the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. You get all of our content, not just on the Heat, but on Messi, the Panthers, the Marlins, the Hurricanes, and the Dolphins. Also, check out Off the Floor. Go to winnow.app/off the floor. That's where you get text directly to your phone from the four of us at Five on the Floor. Also, you get columns, Q&As, contests, and more. Just go to winnow.app/off the floor. It's $3.05 per month. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. That includes our friend Lynette. Find her at insurancebyLynette.com. Life insurance, renters insurance, homeowners insurance. She sells everything there, and she'll work with you to make sure that you get the best deal. Also, a huge Miami Heat fan and just a great person who's on our streams all the time. So work with someone like you based here in South Florida in the North Lauderdale area. Go to insurancebyLynette.com. That's with two N's and two T's. InsurancebyLynette.com. She represents A Aggressive Insurance. And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne. Yikes. Five on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frauds. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust, it's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat, y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on Five Reasons Sports. We got Brady Hawk. You can follow him at Brady Hawk 305. Been focusing a lot on Dwayne Wade. We did that for a week leading up to his Hall of Fame induction. Then kind of pivoted back to some other episodes, Dame related a little bit, Jovic related. We'll get into more Jovic as we go forward because he's still kind of killing it at FIBA. So we've got another episode coming up related to him that goes a little bit back historically on the Heat. But today we're going to look just in a very sort of tactile way here at players who actually will be at training camp, or we believe they will be at training camp, because right now we don't know what's going to happen with the Dame thing. Everybody keeps asking me. I was actually at a show at Hard Rock Live last night, Brady, and 4 different people came up to me. When are we getting Dame? And wanting to know why my phone wasn't on. It was literally during a performance at Hard Rock Live. You're not supposed to have your phone on. But, of course, that's the time that this stuff would typically happen. But look, I don't expect anything here until we get closer to training camp. It doesn't feel like there's anything to move the process. If the memo didn't move the process, if Dame going back to Portland for a week, all this other stuff. I mean, there's been some little events that maybe you could look at and say, okay, maybe something's going to happen now. But I really think ultimately we're looking at about a week before camp and things start to get serious. And then we see if Dame has an interview, doesn't have an interview. We see where the Harden situation is and how that plays into it. The Embiid situation. There's a lot of stuff out there, but there's nothing that forces Joe Cronin to do anything now. He has to feel the footsteps of Dame coming to training camp and what that's going to be like for him and his organization, and to see there are no other offers out there. And then I think we might actually see movement. So what we want to get into is players will be in camp and the hopefuls, because we know that the Heat usually mine a couple of gems every year. Last year, Haywood Highsmith was the guy who emerged the most, I would say, of the young guys. Jamal Cain had a couple of moments. Orlando Robinson showed some things, but now Orlando gets another opportunity this year on a full contract. It's this progression, Brady. It's like they find them, then they become exhibit 10s or two ways. Then eventually some of them graduate to the big roster. And then about 2 years after that, we have the conversation about whether or not they should pay them. So let's go through it. Let's go through some of the Exhibit 10s that came in and just start with the one that you think is the best fit to play quickly.
I think in terms of that, I think it's Cole Swider, which is actually, I think, their most interesting one, just because whenever they go off the grid with a pickup in terms of not being in the Sioux Falls or not being in Heat Summer League, when they find a guy that's on another roster and say, we like that guy, they usually kind of end up leaning in that direction quicker, it feels like. They've done this frequently. We think back at Darius Days last year, they kind of grabbed from another team. They quickly kind of moved forward with him, but obviously he just didn't work out. It just did not fit their timeline at all. But Cole Swider, I just think makes a lot of sense. I've been saying over and over that in terms of these Exhibit 10s in two ways, it has to be shooting. It just has to be these different types of shooters, not just because they lost to Max, Not just because they even lost Gabe, who was part of their shooting core. Tyler and Duncan are in trade talks every single day that we open up any type of social media app. They need shooting on the roster. And when it was only Drew Peterson, who we're going to get into probably next, they need to add a little bit extra. And Cole Swider seems to be that. He's 6'9". His jumper is really pure. I think there was certain questions about why that, like, if he's so amazing of a shooter and all this stuff. I think we always have this question is like, why did he end up in Miami's hands if he was so great? Well, it's like, he has certain weaknesses just like all these guys do. If you're ending up in this type of range, if you're undrafted and you end up in Exhibit 10 range, you have a certain weakness, but it's what Miami is best at is kind of diminishing those weaknesses in a way and playing into their strengths. And his strength is just straight shooting. Like, there's certain things that I think there's going to be question marks defensively. There's going to be some things about maybe not having an all-around offensive game, but the shooting seems to be that good that they could just say, they can run pin downs for him. They can run movement stuff on him. If they get a switch, they can run stuff like that because he is bigger than, let's say, a Max who was 6'5". So I think he's just really intriguing, and the way that they kind of picked him up. And it was kind of funny that like Shams was out there putting like a national tweet out there about Cole Swider signing to Miami, because it's just, you don't really see that too often. So I thought at first maybe it was going to be an immediate two-way. Maybe it was going to be kind of an immediate roster spot, some people thought. But no, it ended up being Exhibit 10. I personally think this is the guy that ends up getting one of those 3 two-ways.
All right, so I think there's a couple of reasons that Shams put this out. One, he was a guy who was in camp with the Lakers or Summer League, so there's going to be more attention there. And second, I do think that there is a little bit more sensitivity to the Heat picking up a guy like this, because they do have a history of developing these players. And, you look at the Heat roster, and the one thing that we've talked about over and over is, do they have enough shooting? Like, even as they're currently constituted, and, the numbers on the team right now, like 47.5 wins. Greg and I got into it the other day a little bit about, because I think that they're better than last year, but the one thing they do not have is a ton of movement shooting. We've discussed that, or a ton of the guys who are shooting specialists, even though I do think they're going to get better shooting from some than some expect. I think that Josh Richardson back in that role can shoot in the high 30s. And I also think that you're going to see improvement in Caleb's three-point shooting, provided he's here. And we'll see if Jovic gets in the rotation, and also would love getting minutes from the start of camp. They got a couple more guys who they could look at there, but they don't have the shooting specialists, with the exception of Duncan Robinson. By the way, programming note, we're going to have Max Strus on the podcast next week. He wants to say basically thank you to Heat fans, and we're going to give him a forum to do that. We've enjoyed our conversations with Max in the past, so I'm looking forward to that. He's actually moving to Cleveland this week, so that I've done that. That's a sad thing, Max. We're sorry for you. All right, but so Cole Swider except I didn't get $63 million. So Cole Swider is somebody to keep an eye on. You mentioned Drew Peterson here. Now, he was in Heat camp, and he was somebody you identified early as a possibility for them. What are some of the differences between the two of them?
So it feels like Drew Peterson has more of like an all-around game in terms of the stuff we saw in Summer League. Like, you saw the playmaking specifically, I think, is intriguing. The stuff he did at USC was a lot more. It wasn't just spot-up shooting or movement shooting. He did a lot of stuff on ball. He did a lot of stuff in the mid-range. Like, he had a little bit more of a bag to him. And I think the issue is, and we've got into this on playback before, we watched some of this stuff, was like, the main difference is, the thing that Miami likes most with their shooters is guys that are just willing to get the ball up. Like, Max was that guy. Like, when you just brought up Max, in terms of, we think back to his like first preseason game, he had a very bad first preseason game, but he got the ball up a ton. Like, I think he got up like double-digit threes. They like that. They like a guy that has like that green light. That's something that Cole Swider has, and I think that's what Drew Peterson needs to develop, just because he hasn't been, high volume. Like, I thought there was a little bit more need for him to just kind of get the ball up in Summer League, and he wasn't able to do that. So maybe that it restricts things in some ways. Maybe they can get that out of him. I don't think Duncan at first had that green light. Like, I remember stories at first when they used to talk about Duncan, he was like, guys are shocked when they hear like Eric Spoelstra coming up to them saying, no, every time you're open, shoot the ball. Like, we don't care about what contract you're on or anything. You're shooting. That is your job. So maybe it could develop. But yeah, that's why Drew Peterson's intriguing. And as much as we kind of think like Cole Swider, I feel like in our heads is like much bigger, Drew Peterson's also like 6'8". So he's also a lengthier shooter, can kind of get the ball up. He had a very good, like, efficiency-wise Summer League. Like, he shot, I remember at one point he was in the 50s% from three. So yeah, that'll be an intriguing one. It feels like Cole Swider or Drew Peterson is going to be in a battle for that two-way spot just because they need a shooter on a two-way, it feels like to me. So those guys will be in that bit of a battle. It kind of comes down to, honestly, whoever has the better training camp. It's really that simple. So it's just whoever kind of shoots better in that range at that certain time.
Yeah, and also don't rule out players, as you mentioned, they poach one from another summer league. They could poach one from another training camp roster too. And they've done that in the past late in camp. All right, when we come back, we'll get into some of the others. I do want to, also discuss, in addition to the Exhibit 10s, also the two-way guys here. So we'll expand it a little bit. So these are all kind of players in the mix, and we'll see who can make the Heat. And some of them fit better with Dame and some fit better without Dame. So that may play a role in this as well. Do want to mention a couple great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We have fantasy and gambling partners. They're different. Our fantasy partner is Prize Picks. Use that code 5, F-I-V-E. Get that initial deposit matched up to $100. This is where you can go, again, to play the daily props. You can do these on just about everything. When I mention everything, they're going to have the FIBA props up there soon for the basketball fans, but also the NFL futures props. The NFL season props are up. They're up, not just the futures, but also for the first game of the season. So if you want to play the Dolphins against the Chargers, you can do that right now. We'll see if the Dolphins have any healthy players by then. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Get that initial deposit match up to $100. Better Edge, our code is 5RSN. That's the number 5RSN. Get $20 to play. That's free play. This is legal betting because you're betting against others who use it. You can find the line that you want instead of betting against the app. So go to betteredge.com. That's betteredge.com and use the code 5RSN. All right, so let's branch out a little bit. Exhibit 10s, again, you can give out more than just 2. Give me a couple of the other guys that are on there.
Yeah, so you have Alondes Williams, who I think we saw a lot of. We wanted to see a little bit more of, in Summer League, partly because Chase Audige ended up going to another team, and I think there was a big expectation that he'd end up probably even on a two-way immediately, not even in Exhibit 10. So right when he left, it was pretty clear that Alondes Williams was going to be next, just because he showed a little bit of kind of similar stuff. He has some of that defensive ability. He did that in college. He has an ability to finish at the rim at a high level. He shot decently well from, I don't know about the 3-point percentage as much. I feel like they could develop that, and that's always going to increase, but he has some decent feel in the mid-range. So it's a decent kind of guard to kind of utilize. That there's a really guard-heavy group in the mix of Exhibit 10s in two ways, just because the two ways with Jamari Boye and Drew Smith, and then you have Alondes Williams. Then the other guard that's on the Exhibit 10 list is Caleb Daniels, who's a guy that did not get a lot of run in Summer League. And it was a guy that I thought would, just because before he even started, I kind of said that I thought he would be like a real Heat guy. He's undersized, but he plays like really physical out of Villanova. Like he's streaky from 3, but he's just plays in that little post game, very good defensively. Like it's a lot of Heat characteristics just with the physicality alone. But yeah, it's a lot of guards. Like it's a lot of guards to kind of sort through. And it seems like with the Drew Smith, Jamari Boye ones that are stuck in that two-way slot, I will say really quickly that Drew Smith doesn't feel to be the most like loved projection-wise, just because he seems like he is what he is at this point, but he has the highest floor. So like to give him his credit, because I feel like everybody's just gonna like push him aside. I could see him still being in the mix just because of the fact that if, let's say, your point guard goes down and you need a backup point guard for the night in a random game in January, like he could probably do the least bad, if that makes sense. Like he could kind of settle you in a way where he's not going to ruin a game and have a terrible plus minus most likely. So that's kind of the thought for him.
And that matters for a team that currently has one point guard on the roster, or the main roster, and that point guard has been in trade discussions and is in his late 30s. You may be looking for a player there. I guess when we look at the rest of it, we talk about the guy who's kind of caught in the middle here, because Orlando Robinson got the standard contract, but Jamal Cain has not. So what does he need to show in camp in your view? Or do we think this just has to do with what other pieces they may be holding out a spot for? I know Greg reported again that there continues to be at least some interest. I don't know. The Oubre one, I don't know if it's more from the Heat or more from his side, to be honest. And I don't know that he would take a minimum, but you never know, push comes to shove. Christian Wood seems he's legitimately interested in the Heat. And I do know the interest is mutual, but it's got to be the right circumstances. And some of the circumstances may be based on whether Jovic is still here, which is another podcast we've done and are going to keep doing. But Jamal Cain, though, like he had a great camp last year. Didn't seem to do anything to hurt himself during the regular season. I know he was up and down. He had some injuries, etc. But what does he need to show something here? Do you think?
Not really, in my opinion. I think it's more about the roster, just because we keep talking about it, that this team is so front court heavy that, like, let's say there's no trade that goes down and this is the roster that they end up utilizing. I just don't know where he fits in. Like, even if they have certain guys out on a certain night, like, it is just very crowded when you go down the line of the Love, Bam, Jovic, Thomas Bryant, Jaquez, if you want to throw him in the mix. You have Caleb, who probably is going to be characterized as a guard finally, just because of the way this roster looks, but he has played most of his minutes at the 4 in past years. So it's very crowded, so it's hard to see where he fits in. But I think in terms of if there are moves made, he's definitely, I think, an immediate kind of routine into a kind of a standard deal. But what does he have to show? I mean, I think it's just similar, just trying to walk the path of Highsmith, just because I think they like that mold and maybe show a little bit more, just because do you really need 2 Haywood Highsmiths on your roster? Like, I think you will kind of want that one glue guy that you could find defensively, that could do some things offensively, that can maybe kind of be a 3-and-D guy. So maybe he has to set himself apart in a way from Highsmith, where he says, well, I could do a little bit more inside the arc with slashing and kind of putting pressure on the rim in this way, or doing stuff like that. I know every time a player gets a Jimmy cosign, they always end up kind of being that next guy in line in the rotation of those players. Jamal Cain has gotten a big Jimmy's cosign. Like, he's one of those guys in practice where he would go at him. I remember posting a bunch of times those one-on-ones with him. Like, he was really kind of giving him the Jimmy treatment, where he's kind of yelling at him in a way that he's saying, like, I like this guy. So right from that moment, it felt like he was be a guy that sticks.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Jimmy cosign. He also got the Bam cosign last year after a preseason game, where on the shout out on the way there. All right, so as we close, we want to thank our sponsors, Aggressive Insurance, also Better Edge and Prize Picks, and check out our additional content throughout the week. Give me your bit. So what is going to surprise people out of this group? Like, somebody, we're going to get to the end of camp and say, okay, because Caleb was a little bit of a different situation. You and I kind of identified that day one. And then it just kept getting better and better and better. But what's going to be the thing we take out of this? We're like, okay, we did not really see that coming.
Honestly, I'll probably say the guy that we didn't talk about much is probably Jamari Boye. I just think that maybe he shows a little bit more. I thought he had like a really good summer league in terms of showcasing it all. Like, the one issue with him was that he wasn't Drew Smith in a way where, like, he wasn't controlling an offense and, like, didn't have that high floor of, like, doing that. He showed that much more in summer league, and he showed his playmaking. He still has a 3-ball. His speed is unreal. I just think the speed part of it is, like, it's such a natural ability with the way he could kind of just change speeds and do stuff in the half court and kind of on the break, that I think he's going to surprise people, where he's going to kind of be the next guy in line where he gets those minutes. And like I said, as much as I say the front court is crowded, the back court is not. Trade or not, like, both ways. Like, there's opportunities for certain guys that I think Jamari Boye could kind of surprise people. And I'll say the other guy that we didn't mention was Justin Champagnie, who kind of ended up back on an Exhibit 10 after being with Sioux Falls before. I'll just say that where every time, like, there's a guy that bounces away and back from this type of range, it feels like a guy they just want to get in their Sioux Falls roster, just a guy that'll fall back afterwards. So I don't know if this is a guy that's really in play for a 2-way, but I think they're just trying to get him back in the Sioux Falls type of just that type of roster and everything to kind of develop. So that would be interesting. But I will say Boye is my guy that I think will probably surprise people. Do you have a different one that you think?
No, it's funny. You mentioned him. He reminds me a little of, like, Reggie Jackson. I don't know why, but sort of the speed when Reggie came out. Now, Reggie was a first-round pick, but he was playing behind Westbrook at first. But that was kind of the question too. Could he run an offense? He was kind of streaky as a 3-point shooter. And again, Reggie's time appears that his time as a starter or even a court rotation player is probably over with. He didn't play much with Denver during the playoffs last year, but he's had moments over the course of his career, and I wonder if they envision him a little bit that way. I agree with you about Swider in the sense that when they poach a guy from someone else, that tends to be the guy they have most focus on. They also have the greatest need there. And the fact that they didn't sort of push too hard for Audige, after he was ready to leave, they couldn't guarantee him much, tells you something. Also, I do think that Jamal Cain has a role on this team that's a little different than Highsmith's. I understand, as a defender and kind of plugging in, but I just see more of an athletic upside there. And I feel like if they want to get out and run a little bit more, particularly We'll see if Dame, comes obviously, but I feel like I don't know. I feel like Jamal Cain's going to be part of the plans in some way, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting one of those slots. I just think they're doing their due diligence right now because they don't know how many guys they're sending out. That's a thing, and that will change the roster spot equation. So we'll see which of these guys we're talking about going forward. Of course, Max and Gabe came through this system, as did Duncan, many others before then. Thanks to Brady. Check out all the episodes as we keep them coming this week, as we're only about a month away from training camp, which is just insane. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network.